The announcement echoed through Terminal C at Boston Logan International Airport like a death sentence. Final boarding call for Flight 447 to Los Angeles. And that's when Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Tech Industries and one of the most powerful women in America, made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She looked down at her 7-year-old autistic son, Mason, who was rocking frantically in the corner of Gate 23, overwhelmed by the chaos of thousands of travelers, and she simply walked away. Not to the bathroom, not to buy snacks. She boarded that plane and left her child behind, alone in one of the busiest airports in the world. What happened next would expose a truth so devastating that it would shatter Victoria's billion-dollar empire, destroy her reputation overnight, and force the entire nation to confront an uncomfortable question. How far can wealth and power protect you when your own conscience finally breaks? But this story isn't just about a mother's unforgivable choice. It's about Marcus Chen, a 34-year-old single father working the night shift as a janitor in Terminal C. A man who had lost everything, his wife, his teaching career, his middle-class life, yet somehow found the strength to do what a billionaire couldn't: see a frightened child and refuse to walk away. If you're feeling the weight of this story already, hit that subscribe button now, because what unfolds over the next 3 hours will challenge everything you thought you knew about love, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be a parent. The clock on the departure board read 11:47 p.m. when Victoria Sterling first noticed her son beginning to unravel. She had been pacing the gate area for 20 minutes, her Hermes heels clicking against the polished floor like a metronome counting down to disaster. Her phone was pressed to her ear, conducting what she claimed was a critical merger call with her legal team, though anyone watching closely would have noticed her voice growing sharper, more desperate with each passing minute. Mason sat in the corner where she had positioned him, his small frame folded into himself like origami made of anxiety. The 7-year-old wore noise-canceling headphones that did nothing to block out the sensory assault of Gate 23. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A baby cried 3 seats away. The metallic voice of the gate agent crackled through speakers every few minutes. Wheeled suitcases rumbled past like thunder. For Mason, who experienced the world as if all his nerve endings had been stripped bare, the airport wasn't just overwhelming, it was torture. Victoria had known this. She had known it when she booked the red-eye flight. She had known it when she dismissed the nanny that morning with a curt, "I can handle one evening alone with my son." She had known it when she chose the busiest travel day of the year to finally take Mason to see his grandfather in Los Angeles, the grandfather who had been asking to meet his only grandchild for 3 years. But knowing and caring, Victoria was learning, were two very different things. "The Yamamoto deal cannot wait until Monday," she hissed into her phone, watching from the corner of her eye as Mason began the rhythmic rocking that always preceded a meltdown. "If we don't close this tonight, Chen Industries will swoop in and—" Mason's rocking intensified. His hands started flapping, small, desperate movements like a bird trying to escape a cage. A businessman in an expensive suit glanced over and frowned with the kind of judgment that cut deeper than any boardroom criticism Victoria had ever faced. "Mrs. Sterling," the gate agent's voice came over the intercom, professional but strained. "Final boarding call for Flight 447. The aircraft doors will be closing momentarily." Victoria looked at her son, really looked at him for the first time all evening. His face was flushed red. Silent tears streamed down his cheeks. His whole body trembled with the effort of containing a scream that everyone in the terminal would hear if it escaped. She had 2 choices: miss the flight and lose the deal that would cement her company's dominance in the tech industry, or— "Ma'am?" The gate agent was standing beside her now, boarding pass scanner in hand. We need to board you now if you're traveling. Victoria Sterling had built an empire by making impossible decisions under crushing pressure. She had fired loyal employees to save quarterly earnings. She had dissolved partnerships that had lasted decades. She had chosen profit over people so many times that the calculation had become automatic. But this wasn't a business decision. This was her child. The businessman who had been staring walked past them toward the boarding gate, and as he did, he muttered just loud enough for Victoria to hear, "Some people shouldn't be allowed to have children." Something inside Victoria snapped, not into compassion as it should have, into rage. She looked at Mason, red-faced and trembling, and for one horrifying moment, she saw him the way the businessman did, as an embarrassment, a burden, a problem that money and power couldn't solve. "I need to take this call," Victoria said to the gate agent, holding up her phone. Could you just watch him for a moment?" The gate agent, a young woman named Sarah who had been working double shifts to pay for nursing school, glanced at Mason and nodded. "Of course, ma'am, but please hurry." Victoria walked 15 feet away, far enough that Mason couldn't reach her, and turned her back to him. Her phone wasn't ringing. There was no urgent call, but she pressed it to her ear anyway and began a fake conversation loud enough for everyone around her to hear. "Yes, I understand the urgency," she said to no one. "The Tokyo markets open in 6 hours. Behind her, Mason's rocking became violent. The noise-canceling headphones slipped from his ears, and suddenly every sound in Terminal C hit him like a physical blow. A luggage cart crashed into a wall. Someone laughed too loudly. A child shrieked with delight at seeing their grandmother. Mason opened his mouth, and the scream that had been building inside him for 3 hours finally escaped. It wasn't just loud. It was primal, desperate, the sound of a child whose nervous system had been pushed beyond its breaking point. Every person in the gate area turned to stare. The businessman shook his head in disgust. Someone whispered, "Where's his mother?" Victoria heard it all, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she walked toward the boarding gate, still pretending to be on her call. "Mrs. Sterling," Sarah, the gate agent, called after her. "Your son—" "I know," Victoria called back without turning around. "I'll be right there. Just finishing this call." But she didn't finish the call. She handed her boarding pass to the scanner, walked down the jet bridge, and disappeared into the aircraft. Sarah stood frozen, Mason's screams echoing around her, a 7-year-old boy in complete meltdown and no parent in sight. The departure board still read 11:47 p.m. In 17 minutes, Flight 447 would taxi away from the gate and disappear into the night sky, taking Victoria Sterling to her billion-dollar deal in Los Angeles. And in Terminal C, a child would learn that some abandonments are so complete, they redefine the word forever. What Sarah couldn't have known, what no one could have predicted, was that Marcus Chen had been watching from the janitor's closet near Gate 24. He had seen the whole thing unfold. He had watched Victoria Sterling walk away from her screaming child and board that plane. Marcus had spent 2 years cleaning these terminals, invisible to the travelers who rushed past him. He had seen families reunite with tears of joy. He had seen soldiers return home to surprise their children. He had seen love in 1,000 different forms. But he had never seen anything like this. And Marcus Chen, who had lost everything and had every reason to mind his own business, was about to make a choice that would change both his life and Mason's forever. The clock ticked forward, 11:48 p.m. The real story was just beginning. If you're feeling the tension of this story and want to know what happens when Marcus steps in to help Mason, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Marcus Chen had been invisible for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. 2 years of pushing a janitor's cart through Logan Airport at 3 a.m., emptying trash bins while business executives stepped around him like he was furniture, had taught him that to most people, he simply didn't exist. But invisibility, Marcus had learned, came with an unexpected gift: the ability to witness truth when people thought no one was watching. And what he had witnessed at Gate 23 would haunt him forever. 47 minutes had passed since Flight 447 departed for Los Angeles. 47 minutes since Victoria Sterling had abandoned her autistic son in one of the busiest airports in America. And in those 47 minutes, Marcus had watched a 7-year-old boy cycle through terror, exhaustion, and a heartbreaking kind of hope that kept him staring at the departure gate, waiting for his mother to come back. Mason Sterling now sat curled in the corner of Gate 23, his small body pressed against the wall like he was trying to disappear into it. His meltdown had subsided into quiet rocking, but his eyes, dark brown and filled with an intelligence that most people missed, remained fixed on the empty boarding gate. Every few minutes he would whisper something so softly that only Marcus, who had positioned himself close enough to listen, could hear it. "Mama coming back, Mama coming back." Sarah, the gate agent, had done everything she could. She had called airport security, who had contacted Child Protective Services. She had tried to reach Victoria Sterling's emergency contacts, only to discover that there were none listed. She had even attempted to comfort Mason directly, but her approach had triggered another meltdown that left both of them shaken. Now Sarah stood behind her desk, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones to her supervisor while casting worried glances at Mason every few seconds. Marcus understood why she kept her distance. Most people, when confronted with an autistic child in distress, made the same mistakes. They got too close too fast, spoke too loudly, tried to force eye contact, offered comfort that felt like assault to nervous systems already overwhelmed. They meant well, but meaning well and helping were different things entirely. Marcus knew this because he had made those same mistakes once, in another life, when he had been Dr. Marcus Chen, professor of developmental psychology at Boston University, before the cancer took his wife, Elena, before the medical bills destroyed their savings, before grief and financial ruin cost him everything, including the career he had spent 15 years building. But knowledge, Marcus had learned, was like muscle memory. You could lose everything else, your house, your status, your faith in the world. But once you truly understood how to reach a child who had retreated into themselves, that understanding stayed with you forever. Marcus made his decision. He pushed his janitor's cart slowly toward Gate 23, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished floor. He didn't approach Mason directly. Instead, he began cleaning the area around the boy, moving with deliberate calm, humming quietly under his breath. The humming wasn't random. It was a technique he had developed during his years working with autistic children, a low, steady melody that provided auditory predictability without demanding attention, background sound that could anchor without overwhelming. Mason's rocking slowed slightly. His eyes remained fixed on the departure gate, but Marcus could see the tension in his small shoulders begin to ease. Marcus continued his careful approach, cleaning the same spot multiple times, moving in a pattern that was soothing rather than efficient. He kept humming, kept his movements slow and predictable, and most importantly, he didn't try to make eye contact or speak to Mason directly. After 10 minutes, something remarkable happened. Mason's whispered chant changed. "Mama coming back, Mama coming back, music man, music man." Marcus's chest tightened. The boy was acknowledging his presence, but in a way that felt safe. Marcus wasn't man or stranger, or any of the threatening labels an overwhelmed child might assign. He was music man, defined by the one thing that was helping rather than hurting. Sarah noticed the change too. She approached Marcus cautiously, speaking in the kind of whisper that adults use when they're afraid of breaking something fragile. "Excuse me," she said. Are you doing something special?" He seems calmer. Marcus paused his cleaning, leaning against his mop handle. Up close, Sarah could see that he wasn't what she had expected. His janitor's uniform was clean but worn, his face lined with the kind of exhaustion that comes from working multiple jobs. But his eyes held something she couldn't quite name, a depth that didn't match the job title embroidered on his shirt. "I'm just cleaning," Marcus said quietly, "but I think he likes predictable sounds. The humming gives him something steady to focus on." "How do you know that?" Sarah asked. Marcus hesitated. The truth was complicated, and explaining his former life to a stranger felt like excavating a grave. "I used to work with children like Mason," he said finally. Before. The word carried the weight of everything he had lost, but Sarah was sharp enough not to push. "The CPS worker is on her way," Sarah said, glancing at her watch. "Should be here within the hour, but I don't know what to do until then. How do you just abandon a child? How do you get on a plane and leave your 7-year-old behind?" Marcus looked at Mason, still rocking gently, still whispering his hopeful mantra. "You don't," he said, his voice harder than he intended. "Not unless something inside you is broken beyond repair." What Marcus didn't say, what he couldn't explain to Sarah, was that he recognized something in Mason's careful self-soothing, something that went beyond autism. This wasn't just a child with sensory processing issues having a bad day at the airport. This was a child who had learned to comfort himself because the adults in his life had failed to do it for him. Marcus had seen it before, in his research, in his clinical work. Children who developed what he called precocious self-regulation, the ability to manage their own overwhelming emotions because they couldn't rely on their caregivers to help them do it. It was a survival skill that no 7-year-old should need to master. "Can I try something?" Marcus asked Sarah. She nodded, stepping back to give him space. Marcus set down his mop and slowly, very slowly, sat on the floor about 6 feet away from Mason, not close enough to feel threatening, but close enough to be present. He resumed his quiet humming, but this time he added something new, a gentle tapping pattern against the floor. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. A rhythm that matched the melody. Mason's rocking began to sync with the rhythm. His whispered chant quieted, and then, so softly that Marcus almost missed it, Mason began to hum along. It wasn't the same melody. Mason's version was higher, more fragmented, but it was harmony. For the first time in almost an hour, Mason Sterling wasn't alone with his terror. Sarah watched from behind her desk, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She had worked at Logan for 3 years, had seen thousands of family dramas play out in the gate areas, but she had never seen anything like this. A janitor and an abandoned autistic child sitting on an airport floor at midnight, creating music together in the aftermath of unthinkable cruelty. 20 minutes passed. The terminal grew quieter as the last flights of the evening departed. The crowds thinned to a handful of passengers waiting for red-eye connections and the skeleton crew of overnight workers. In the growing quiet, the sound of Marcus's humming and Mason's tentative harmony seemed to expand, filling the space around Gate 23 with something that felt almost sacred. It was Marcus who noticed it first. Mason's eyes had shifted. Instead of staring fixedly at the departure gate, waiting for a mother who wasn't coming back, he was looking at Marcus. Not direct eye contact, that would have been too overwhelming, but sidelong glances that spoke of growing trust. "Mason," Marcus said softly, testing the boy's name for the first time. "That's a strong name, like a builder, someone who makes things that last." Mason's humming faltered for a moment, then resumed. But now there was something different in it, a questioning quality that told Marcus the boy was listening. "I bet you're hungry," Marcus continued, keeping his voice low and even. "Airport food isn't very good, but there's a vending machine with crackers. Would you like some crackers, Mason?" This time, Mason's humming stopped entirely. He turned to look at Marcus directly, just for a split second, before returning his gaze to his own hands. But that split second was enough. Marcus had worked with autistic children long enough to recognize the signs. Mason was considering trust. It was then that Sarah's phone rang, sharp and urgent in the quiet terminal. She answered quickly, speaking in hushed tones, but Marcus caught fragments of the conversation that made his blood run cold. "What do you mean she's not coming back?" "But she's his mother." "Yes, I understand, but what about the child? How can she just refuse?" Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest. He had suspected, but hearing it confirmed was different. Victoria Sterling wasn't just late. She wasn't caught in some misunderstanding or family emergency. She had made a conscious choice to abandon her son, and now she was refusing to come back for him. Sarah ended the call and approached Marcus with the kind of careful steps people take when delivering devastating news. "That was my supervisor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They reached Victoria Sterling in Los Angeles. Sarah's voice broke. "She told them she's not coming back. She said she's surrendering parental rights and that the state can deal with the situation." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He had worked with neglectful parents, absent parents, even abusive parents, but he had never encountered anything this calculatingly cruel. Victoria Sterling hadn't abandoned her son in a moment of panic or desperation. She had used him as collateral damage in whatever twisted cost-benefit analysis she had running in place of a heart. Marcus looked at Mason, still humming softly, still believing his mama was coming back, and felt something he hadn't experienced in the 2 years since he'd lost everything. Righteous anger. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer would be heartbreaking. "CPS will take custody tonight," Sarah said, wiping at her eyes. "Emergency placement in the system until they can find him a suitable home." "But Marcus," she gestured toward Mason, who had begun rocking again, sensing the tension in the adults' voices. "How do you explain to a 7-year-old that his mother just gave up on him?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching Mason's small form curled against the wall. Then he did something that surprised even himself. "You don't," he said, standing up slowly. "Not tonight. Tonight you just make sure he knows he's not alone." What happened next would later be described by airport security cameras as simply a janitor comforting an abandoned child. But for Marcus Chen, it was the moment he stopped being invisible and started being present, not just to Mason, but to himself. He sat back down, closer this time, and began to hum again. And when Mason's small voice joined his in tentative harmony, Marcus made a silent promise to a child who had been failed by the one person who should have protected him above all else. Whatever happened next, wherever Mason went, he would remember this night not as the night his mother abandoned him, but as the night a stranger chose to stay. The digital clock above the departure gate clicked forward to 12:34 a.m., and in Terminal C, a broken man and an abandoned boy began the slow work of healing each other, one quiet note at a time. The fluorescent lights in Terminal C had been dimmed for the overnight hours, casting long shadows across the empty gate areas. It was 2:17 a.m. when everything changed. Marcus had been sitting with Mason for over 2 hours, their quiet humming creating a bubble of calm in the sterile airport environment when the sound of approaching footsteps shattered their fragile peace. "There he is," came a sharp voice that cut through the terminal like broken glass. Marcus looked up to see a woman in an expensive coat striding toward them, flanked by two airport security officers and a tired-looking woman clutching a clipboard. The woman in the coat was tall, blonde, and carried herself with the kind of authority that demanded immediate attention. Even at 2 a.m., she looked like she had stepped out of a boardroom. "I'm Catherine Whitmore," she announced, her voice crisp and businesslike. "Victoria Sterling's attorney. I'm here to collect the child." Marcus felt Mason's small body tense beside him. The boy's humming stopped abruptly, replaced by the rapid breathing that Marcus recognized as the beginning of panic. Sarah, who had been dozing at her desk, stood up quickly. "Ma'am, CPS is handling the custody situation. The caseworker should be here any minute." "There's been a change of plans," Catherine said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through emails as she spoke. "Mrs. Sterling has reconsidered. She's returning to Boston tonight to collect her son." The words should have been cause for celebration, but something in Catherine's tone made Marcus's skin crawl. This wasn't the voice of someone delivering good news. This was damage control. "When?" Sarah asked, hope creeping into her voice despite everything. "Her flight lands at 6 a.m., Catherine replied, without looking up from her phone. "In the meantime, I have instructions to ensure Mason is properly cared for until she arrives." Marcus stood slowly, positioning himself between Catherine and Mason. "And where exactly would properly cared for be?" he asked. Catherine looked at Marcus for the first time, her gaze taking in his janitor's uniform with barely concealed disdain. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Someone who's been here for the past 3 hours, Marcus replied, his voice steady but cold. "Someone who didn't abandon a 7-year-old boy in an airport." The security officers shifted uncomfortably. Sarah stepped forward, sensing the tension escalating. "Ma'am," Sarah said to Catherine, "Mason has been very calm with Marcus here. Maybe we should just wait for—" "The child will be coming with me," Catherine interrupted. "Mrs. Sterling has arranged for a private room at the Marriott where he can wait comfortably until her arrival." It was then that Marcus noticed what everyone else had missed. Mason had gone completely still. Not the calm stillness that had marked their quiet time together, but the frozen stillness of a prey animal sensing danger. The boy's eyes were wide, fixed on Catherine with a look of recognition that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Mason," Marcus said softly, crouching down to the boy's level, "do you know this lady?" Mason's response was barely a whisper, but in the quiet terminal, everyone heard it. "Scary lady, Mama's scary lady." Catherine's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "The child is confused," she said quickly. "He's had a traumatic evening. What he needs is proper rest and appropriate accommodations, not to be sitting on an airport floor with—" She gestured dismissively at Marcus, but Marcus wasn't looking at Catherine anymore. He was looking at Mason, who had begun the subtle rocking motion that Marcus now recognized as the boy's way of self-soothing. And in that moment, pieces of a horrifying puzzle began clicking into place. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "could you call that CPS worker again? Ask her how long she's been trying to reach Victoria Sterling. Ask her if this is the first time there have been concerns about Mason's welfare." "What are you implying?" Catherine snapped, but there was something defensive in her voice now. "I'm not implying anything," Marcus replied, standing to face her. "I'm asking direct questions, like why a mother who supposedly just made a mistake would send her lawyer to collect her son instead of coming herself. Or why Mason recognizes you and is clearly afraid of you." One of the security officers, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said to Catherine, "maybe we should wait for the CPS worker to arrive, just to make sure everything's handled properly." "This is ridiculous," Catherine said, her composure cracking further. "I have legal authority here. Mrs. Sterling is the child's mother. The same mother who told airport staff 4 hours ago that she was surrendering parental rights? Marcus asked. The terminal fell silent except for the distant hum of overnight maintenance equipment. Catherine's face had gone pale, and Marcus could see her calculating, trying to figure out how much he knew and how much damage he could do. It was Mason who broke the silence. In a voice so small it was barely audible, he said, "Don't want to go with scary lady. Want music man." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child, who had been abandoned by his mother and traumatized beyond imagination, was choosing to trust him, a stranger, a janitor who had shown him kindness, when the adults in his life had failed him completely. Sarah had been on the phone during the exchange, speaking in hushed tones to someone on the other end. Now she approached the group with a grim expression. "The CPS worker is 10 minutes away," she announced, "and she says there have been multiple reports filed about Mason's care over the past 6 months. Teachers, doctors, even neighbors have called in concerns." Catherine's face flushed red. "Those reports were investigated and found to be baseless. Mrs. Sterling is a respected businesswoman who left her autistic son alone in an airport and flew to another state," Marcus interrupted, "who sent a lawyer instead of coming back herself, who has apparently been the subject of multiple welfare checks." The security officer who had spoken earlier now stepped between Catherine and Mason. "Ma'am, I think we need to wait for CPS to sort this out." What happened next would later be played on news channels across the country. Catherine, realizing that her carefully constructed narrative was falling apart, made one last desperate play. "Fine," she said, pulling out her phone again. "I'll call Mrs. Sterling directly. She can explain the situation herself." She dialed, put the phone on speaker, and after several rings, Victoria Sterling's voice filled the terminal. Even through the phone, she sounded cold, distant. "Catherine, this better be important. I'm in the middle of closing the Yamamoto deal." "Victoria, there's a problem with Mason," Catherine said, glancing nervously at the gathered group. "Some people here are questioning your authority to—" "I don't care what they're questioning." Victoria's voice cut through the speaker like ice. "I told you what I want. Handle it. I don't have time for this right now." Marcus felt something break open inside his chest. Not just anger now, but a protective fury that surprised him with its intensity. "Mrs. Sterling," he said loudly enough for the phone to pick up his voice. "This is Marcus Chen. I've been with your son for the past 3 hours. He's been asking for you. He keeps saying Mama coming back because he believes you love him." There was a long pause. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller. "Who is this? Why are you involving yourself in my family's business?" "Because," Marcus said, his voice steady and clear, "someone had to. Mason is 7 years old. He's autistic. He's been sitting in this airport for hours believing that his mother made a mistake, that she was coming back for him. And instead, you sent a lawyer he's afraid of to drag him to a hotel room so you can finish your business deal." "You don't understand," Victoria said, but there was something cracking in her voice now. "You don't know what it's like. The meltdowns, the schools that won't take him, the looks people give you. I tried, but I can't." "So you threw him away," Marcus said simply. "You threw away a child who loves you because taking care of him was inconvenient." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the overnight airport sound seemed muted, as if the entire terminal was holding its breath. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "I never wanted to be a mother. Jonathan, my husband, he wanted children, but I'm not built for it. And when Mason was diagnosed, I thought maybe I could learn, but every day is so hard, and I have a company to run, and I can't do it anymore." It was the most honest thing she had said all night, and somehow that made it worse. Marcus looked down at Mason, who was listening to every word with the kind of devastating comprehension that children possess. The boy's face was pale, his small hands trembling. "Mrs. Sterling," Marcus said, "your son can hear you." Another long pause. Then, in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well, "I know." The line went dead. The terminal erupted in chaos. Catherine was shouting into her phone, trying to reach Victoria back. The security officers were radiating calls for supervisors. Sarah was crying openly, but Marcus only had eyes for Mason, who had gone completely still. Not the frozen stillness of fear this time, but something worse. The stillness of a child whose world has just shattered completely. "Mason," Marcus said softly, kneeling beside him, "look at me." The boy's eyes met his, and Marcus saw something in them that nearly broke his heart. Not just sadness, but a terrible kind of understanding. Mason had always known, on some level, that his mother didn't want him. Tonight had just confirmed what his 7-year-old heart had been trying to deny. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside him, a place he thought had died with Elena. "Whatever happens next, you're not alone." It was 2:47 a.m. when the CPS worker finally arrived. Her name was Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, and she moved through the chaos of the terminal with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen too much and was determined to do better. She took one look at the scene. The crying gate agent, the arguing lawyer, the security officers, and the janitor sitting protectively beside an autistic child, and immediately took control. Everyone except the child and... She looked at Marcus questioningly. "Marcus Chen," he supplied. "Everyone except Mason and Mr. Chen, please step back. I need to assess the situation without additional stress factors." Catherine started to protest, but Dr. Rodriguez silenced her with a look that could have frozen fire. "Ma'am, you can wait over there. If you try to approach this child again before I've completed my evaluation, I'll have security remove you from the terminal." For the next hour, Dr. Rodriguez conducted the most gentle interview Marcus had ever witnessed. She spoke to Mason in simple, clear language. She asked Marcus about the evening's events. She reviewed the reports that had been filed about the Sterling household, and slowly a picture emerged that was even worse than Marcus had imagined. Victoria Sterling hadn't just abandoned Mason tonight. She had been psychologically abandoning him for years, leaving him with nannies while she traveled, enrolling him in schools that couldn't handle his needs, treating his autism like a personal failure that reflected badly on her image. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Rodriguez said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Mason has clearly formed an attachment to you tonight. In emergency situations like this, we sometimes place children with temporary caregivers who have shown they can provide stable, nurturing care. Would you be willing to consider serving as Mason's emergency foster placement while we work through the legal process?" Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. Foster care, taking responsibility for a child he had met 3 hours ago. The rational part of his mind screamed that he was in no position to care for anyone. He was working as a janitor, living paycheck to paycheck, barely keeping his own life together. But then he looked at Mason, who was looking back at him with those dark brown eyes full of hope and trust. And Marcus realized that some decisions aren't made by your mind. They're made by your heart. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, I'll take care of him." At 4:23 a.m., Marcus Chen walked out of Logan International Airport, carrying a small duffel bag that contained everything Mason Sterling owned. Mason himself walked beside him, his small hand clasped firmly in Marcus's larger one, no longer the abandoned, terrified child who had been left at gate 23. As they stepped into the cool Boston morning air, Mason looked up at Marcus and spoke for the first time in hours. "Music man," he said softly. "Are we going home?" Marcus knelt down so they were eye to eye. "Yes, Mason," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going home." What neither of them could have predicted was that Victoria Sterling's abandoned phone call had been recorded by airport security, that the audio would leak to news outlets within hours, that by the time the sun rose over Boston, the story of the billionaire CEO who abandoned her autistic son and the janitor who chose to save him would become a national sensation. Victoria Sterling would wake up in her Los Angeles hotel room to discover that the Yamamoto deal, the deal she had sacrificed her son to secure, had been terminated. The company wanted nothing to do with someone who could abandon a child so callously. But more than that, she would discover that sometimes the cost of our choices isn't paid by us alone. Sometimes it's paid by the innocent children we're supposed to protect. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, those children find someone who sees their worth when their own parents cannot. The morning sun painted the Boston skyline in shades of gold and promise as Marcus and Mason began their journey together. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. There would be legal battles, media attention, and the long, difficult work of healing a child's wounded heart. But for the first time in 2 years, Marcus Chen felt something he thought he'd lost forever: purpose. And for the first time in his 7 years of life, Mason Sterling felt something every child deserves: unconditional love from someone who chose to stay. The story of their first night together would be told and retold across the country. It would spark conversations about autism, about parental responsibility, about the way society treats its most vulnerable members. But at its heart, it was something much simpler: the story of a broken man and an abandoned boy who found in each other exactly what they needed to become whole again. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story about how love can triumph over abandonment, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.